Welcome back. Hello. So today, excitingly, we're going to talk to you about stress and adrenals and the endocrine system. And so I get particularly excited about, so can't wait. But before we do that, rules of the day. So no mobile phones on, please, during the talk. Obviously check in break times. Please ask questions at the end of a section. And also in the break times, Laura and I are around, so please, do feel free to come and keep asking questions. And confidentiality, anything that's shared by any of you brave enough to be demos, let's just keep it all confidential and in the room. Thank you. Housekeeping, fire escape is at the back or at the front door, and also toilets. We have the downstairs loo, which does need a shoulder bar to get out of, and then upstairs there's the big wooden door, which is the Moroccan bathroom. Please mind your heads. Okay, you all know what you've been here before. So let's move on to stress and adrenals. I'm so excited. Let's go back to juggling the flip chart. Go back to all the prior information. So let's go back to our triangle of hormonal health. So in the first workshop, we've really had a look at blood sugar hormones and those blood sugar instabilities. And already you've started to see that there's a connection with stress hormones, because we mentioned cortisol. Can everyone see? Should I just turn that? Can you see? So we already know, because of that blood sugar roller coaster, that there's quite a big connection with blood sugars and cortisol. So now we're starting to see why these two pieces go so well on the triangle. What's really interesting, and this is again why I bang on about blood sugars, but why stress is so important with blood sugars, is cortisol flooding the body alone can cause diabetes. So cortisol can cause insulin resistance, because cortisol is going to be flooding, I said in the first workshop, cortisol is flooding our muscles with sugar to get us away from crisis. Insulin's trying to store it. And the most important thing is to get away from crisis. That the fundamental purpose of the human body is to keep us alive. Everything it does is to keep us alive. So it's trying to get us out of a crisis. So if the cortisol is always going to be a priority, this is why cortisol itself can cause insulin resistance.
They don't tell you that. In all the stuff you read about intermittent fasting, they don't tell you that. That's really dangerous.
I know.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and this is why we're so passionate about running workshops like this and teaching what we teach, because it's these health myths and these health misnomers. And intermittent fasting is great when your blood sugars are balanced, when your cortisol profile is lower. Like these are the big things. When people say, well, I've tried this diet or I've done that. Yeah, but you've got to look at it in the round. We have to look at it in the round. Yeah? Yeah, you make a really great point. I was going to say anything else about that. And the difficulty with cortisol, as we're going to be talking about, is we're so hardwired to live off of it now. That for me is why I get even more careful with my diet, because I know that just being alive today means a higher stress profile. So that's why it's about being even more careful. That doesn't mean that I don't live my life and have fun and drink alcohol and go out to eat dinner and. But for the most part, it's really, really rigid, because my health can't cope with it not being. Yeah? And even if it could, I don't want to get ill. So that's where we have to get even more strict. And when people say, well, I'm too busy, because they're the times that we have to really apply the tools, really apply it. So, let us move on to. I'm going to give you a little bit of background into what is actually happening in our body. So, stress hormones are created by our adrenal glands, which are part of our endocrine system. So our endocrine system is the series of glands in our body that make these chemical messengers, which are our hormones, yeah? So hormones are just chemical messages that are going through the body, telling the body what needs to be done. So let me explain that to you a bit more. So in our brain, we have got, it's not a gland, but we do consider it part of the endocrine. We have our hypothalamus. And our hypothalamus is essentially the central point of our central nervous system. So this is where, this is electrical signals, electrical messages that come through our fingers, so our touch, our skin, our eyes, nose, taste, sound, yeah. So it's our 5 senses that this information is received. So the smell of burning, something is lodged in our hypothalamus, which is, this could be danger. Something that's too hot to touch, this is dangerous. Yeah, I can see a bus coming towards me, this is dangerous. Yeah, this food is off, this is dangerous. So these messages are electrical and they're super fast, they're instant, aren't they? And they are received by the hypothalamus. This is our nervous system, yeah? And the hypothalamus has many a conversation with one of the glands in our endocrine, which is our pituitary gland. Pituitary, can't write that from the side. Pituitary gland. Now the pituitary gland is actually the conductor of the orchestra. The pituitary gland does so much work, yeah? It's the thing that tells all the other glands what to do. It's busy, busy, busy. And it has conversations with the hypothalamus. So these two are giving messages to the rest of the body. Yep. So you have the pituitary gland. And then somewhere else in the brain we have, which is actually our third eye, we have our pineal gland. Now our pineal gland is to do with light and dark, and the hormones that it creates are serotonin and melatonin. Serotonin is our wake up, melatonin is our go to sleep. Yeah? So these are all in our brain. Then we come down to our thyroid, which is a little sort of butterfly shaped gland in our neck and the throat. And the thyroid is to do with metabolism, so how we metabolize our food. And what that actually means, we always think it's to do with weight. And it is to do with weight, but it's how we get the energy out of our food. Yeah. It's to do with warmth. So whether, and particularly women tend to have mildly underactive thyroids. Most women today, for a variety of reasons, have mildly underactive thyroids, often not able to be picked up clinically in a blood test, but that whole thing is women are often cold, men aren't, because our thyroids are working harder because they're also to do with the menstrual cycle. Yeah, so that's the job of the thyroid: metabolism, warmth, cycle, and energy. Then we have our thymus, which is actually just under, like, it feels like you've got a lumpy rib. Yeah, that's where the thymus sits, under there. And this is to do with our immune system. This is where a big focus of our immune system lives, yeah, in the thymus. It gets smaller as we get older, but we can kind of plump it up and make sure that it's working effectively. Then we come down to our adrenals. Now these sit on top of the kidneys, so right on the back here. They're not going to look like that at the back, but so basically where you've got your belly button, sort of behind there we have our kidneys, and sitting on top of our kidneys we have 2 little triangular glands, which are our adrenal glands. Yeah? So these are stress response. Interestingly, they are also where, once the ovaries start to die off, either because of surgery or the natural menopause, the adrenals take over, making the estrogen and progesterone, which is why I was saying, which is why I always say previously in other workshop, that women are going into menopause stressed, that actually we're having worse menopauses. Yeah, which is again why this triangle is so important. Because if the adrenals are supposed to be taking over the job of creating those hormones, it's not going to make those hormones if it's getting us away from saber-toothed tigers. Yeah? And then we have either the ovaries or testes. So these all work together. Yeah? I'm going to go into that a little bit more. But what I'd like to do now is let's just have a little brainstorm all together. Oh, I didn't finish writing them up. Let me do that. That's shocking. Huh? I can add that in. Adrenals. Yeah, Laura's made a very good point. That whilst it's not a gland, I'm going to mention it anyway because it's so interesting, we have the pancreas, which is, we think, mostly to do with blood sugar balancing because it's where we make insulin, but actually only 5% of its job is making insulin. Isn't that interesting? So that is actually the job, so I have the pancreas somewhere about here. But the fact it makes insulin and therefore makes a hormone is why it's in the endocrine system. 95% of its job is to do with digestion, and it's how we start to break down fats. Which, as a little side note, is why when people have had a pancreas that's working too hard on creating insulin, that their digestions go off. So one of the first things we look at with irritable bowel syndrome is why we say that irritable bowel syndrome, the digestion is a victim of blood sugar stress and instability. Because the pancreas is working too hard on the insulin, it can't do the job of digesting the fats. And it's why, as people get older, they stop being able to absorb. So think about little old people sitting in a old people's home and they're fed tea and biscuits all day, sugary tea and biscuits. Pancreas is doing this huge job of insulin production, not doing enough job breaking down the fats, and the fats is where we get vitamin D from, which is why people fall and break their pelvis as they get older. And it's actually an underlying, very often, it's often tested for in hospitals by good doctors. The pancreas will be actually checked with a PET scan to see if they're actually in insulin resistance. So it's often, those broken pelvises are often low-level diabetes. I know, right? So amazing. Okay, so let's just have a little chat about what symptoms do we experience with stress. What is stress? What do we experience with stress?
Not sleeping.
Sorry? Not sleeping.
Heart palpitations.
Yep. What else?
Overeating.
Yep.
Brain fog.
Yeah.
Unable to concentrate.
Yeah.
General anxiety.
Anxiety, lovely, yeah. It's not lovely at all. Lovely.
Quite irritable.
Irritable. Mm-hmm. What else? What else physically symptom-wise?
Sweaty.
Sweaty, yeah. Then what else? What about headaches, migraines? Yeah.
Have you tried now?
Muscle tension.
Yes, it's great. They're all coming out now.
You crave bad foods.
Fatigue.
Say again?
Fatigue.
Fatigue, lovely. What about digestion?
So lower immunity as well.
Yeah. What about digestion? They will get
Yes, constipated or
constipated or
opposite.
loose. Yeah.
heartburn. So it's not digested.
Loose bowels, that's a no. Sorry, heartburn. Lovely, yeah. What else?
Nausea.
So I used to very much experience, along with sort of constipation or loose bowels, a proper IBS, that gripey, nausea, yeah.
That's hot indigestion.
What about your periods?
No, I skip them completely if I'm really stressed.
Okay, so cycle issues.
PMT.
Yeah, that goes through the roof, doesn't it? Nice. If we're really, really, really stressed, how easy is it to maintain weight? No, either we're losing weight or we're gaining weight, yeah.
Lifestyle problems, kind of like not being able to cope, poor relationships, arguing,
Yeah.
depression.
Tearful. Anything else? Okay, so basically, what's supposed to happen is, as we were saying, you know, all of these glands have got jobs to do. But those jobs can't be done if the body is trying to get us out of danger. But what the body perceives as danger has now become, I'm dehydrated, my blood sugars are off, there's an alarm clock. It's not danger, but our body feels under attack all the time. So what should happen is something like the pituitary would be going, it's about that time of the month. I'm going to tell the thyroid to tell the ovaries to create follicular stimulating hormone. So it's going to do that. We're going to start the cycle. And so the pituitary says to the thyroid, okay, dude, it's time to go do your job. And the thyroid's like, okay, cool. It goes, hang on a minute, wait. I just want to check with the adrenals that there's nothing that we should be aware of. I was like, okay, I'm waiting. So the pituitary has a little chat with the adrenals. It goes, hey guys, everything cool? And the adrenals are supposed to go, yeah, man, everything's cool. Let's get the thyroid doing its job. But the adrenals go, no, there's saber-toothed tigers everywhere. I've got alarms and I've got caffeine and I've got kids and I've got work and I've got stress and I've got finances. And okay, we can't do that job. Okay, so we've got to run away from the saber-toothed tiger. So I'm just flooding the system with cortisol. I'm getting us out of danger. I'm doing my job. So the pituitary goes, oh wow, okay, well, it is not important to be ovulating right now. This is not the important thing. We need to be running away. So the thyroid is then kind of going, okay, what am I doing? And the ovaries are going, well, okay, what are we doing? And the adrenals are just working and working and working. And then it's the same with the pineal gland. Is it useful for us to be asleep when there are saber-toothed tigers trying to get to us? Absolutely not. So the pineal gland is going to be going, right, don't make the melatonin, not going to make it, stay awake, gotta run away. So all of a sudden, we're not sleeping properly. So our thyroid's not working properly, we're not sleeping properly, immune system's going, wow, I am just being flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. We're going to talk about the difference between the two. I'm crashing. I'm absolutely crashing. I cannot sustain any level of immunity. So now I'm letting bugs in left, right and centre. And I'm so overwhelmed. Now I'm just going to start attacking myself, which is autoimmune disease, or I can't see this huge tumour that's growing, which is cancer. And then we've got the pancreas, who of course is now having to deal with all of this cortisol and insulin spiking. So everything is going crazy. So of course ovaries and testes, like I'm not making any estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, not doing any of that, because everything is about the adrenals. They're such divas. Everything becomes about them. And this is where our symptoms are coming from. The insomnia becomes because of the pineal gland. The overeating is because of this insulin imbalancing, the thyroid being out of balance. The anxiety is because of the blood sugar instabilities that are coming, being irritable, again, all of that. And we're literally like this, like coiled springs. All of these symptoms are coming because one of those glands is now, or all of the glands are out of balance, because our adrenals are absolutely demanding all the attention and focus from our endocrine. Yeah? Our nervous system is on high alert because it's being told by the pituitary, stuff isn't okay, be watchful. So we have something called the reticular activating system, which is like, you know, if you've suddenly seen a car that you like and you kind of, oh, this is a whole new car that I've never really seen before, but I've now become aware of it because of an advert, or I saw someone with one, and now all you see is that car. Yeah, that's your reticular activating system. And that can work for us or against us. And in the case of stress, it's seeing everything. Everything we hear, everything we see, is the body going, I've got to be on high alert. I know when I was at my most stressed, even the sound of an email popping into my inbox just gave me that, oh my God, I can't cope with anything else feeling. And so that's the reticular activating system. You've just got to be on high alert all the time, all the time, all the time. So this is how the endocrine is supposed to work, and also how it's currently not working very well. Part of the difficulty with endocrinology in the medical model is they will check hormones by measuring their presence in your blood. That's not telling you what those hormones are doing. So they'll take a blood test and say, yes, you have cortisol in your system, well done. But unless it's wildly, too much or too little, it's just you have cortisol. But cortisol is supposed to start high and then drop off during the day. The blood tests can't show that. It's a static image. So much of this stuff is completely missed by endocrinology, completely missed. And this is where this gets really, really exciting. So our key stress hormones are cortisol and adrenaline. Actually, adrenaline is a neurotransmitter. And so that's basically telling the body, okay, we've got some stress, and then the cortisol is actually the hormone. So what's interesting is adrenaline is supposed to be the quick neurotransmitter to get us out of, to send the messages to get us out of trouble. But actually the adrenaline itself, when we're living on adrenaline, is actually highly inflammatory. So cortisol is anti-inflammatory. So if you have a steroid injection in your hip, or they give you steroids, cortisone, those are anti-inflammatory. Kind of, oh, that's good, but not in high doses. In high doses, cortisol actually slows the whole body down. It stops wound healing. It stops it gets dumped in the bowel because there's too much of it. It stops the bowel from doing its movement to move things along. So that happens. So irritable bowel syndrome, too much cortisol in the system. Too much cortisol completely brings the human body to a standstill and a stop, and we can't function. Yeah? So, what becomes really interesting with these diva-like adrenals is, and this is what we talk about all the time in the clinic, we have pretty much a whole module dedicated to this in our practitioner training course. And this is something I spend my life telling people, because I go, this is what we need to understand. So that whole thing that I was describing about with the saber-toothed tigers, we go, well, why can't the body figure out that they aren't saber-toothed tigers? And the problem is, there is no distinction. An alarm clock, a screaming child, work pressure, family pressure, financial pressure, toxic chemicals in our toiletries, in our cosmetics, in our cleaning products, Wi-Fi, what else? Pollution, pesticides, what else? Carpets, outgassing from carpets and furniture. All of these things are stressors to our body. Oh, foods that we're intolerant to. All of these things are stressors. So even if you are not a stressed person, your body will be going through stress. That is a really important thing for us to understand, that even if we are not stressed, our body is, yeah? And that is, so we've always used the analogy in kinesiology of being little froggies boiling to death. So we're just these little froggies that are in this nice warm water, and we don't realise that it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter because of our environments. Like if you were to take us out, well, we all know this, you go on holiday, you have a really nice time, then you come back in, like that first week is like, oh my God. But then we adapt to it really, really quickly, yeah? So it's so important to become aware of how our lifestyles are contributing to this. So what is actually happening is we have got our hypothalamus again, and we've got our pituitary, and we've got our adrenals down here. And the stress response that is causing us to be unwell is called the HPA axis dysregulation. So HPA, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, i.e. it's this communication that goes on between them, and it's a dysregulation.
Can you just say that again, please?
The HPA axis, AXIS, dysregulation.
And that causes...
So the stress response that I'm about to talk through now,
Okay.
which is why we're seeing so much cortisol build up in the body. So what happens is either the hypothalamus gets that information from our environment and from our senses that there is something to react to, or the pituitary gland gets a chemical message that there is something wrong. So haven't got enough water, or my blood sugars are unstable, so I'm hungry. Yeah, there'll be a message from inside the body, internally, or there'll be a message externally. And so what these guys do is go, right, we've got a crisis, we need to get the adrenals to do their thing. So they send a memo to the adrenal glands that says you need to produce adrenaline and cortisol. Yeah? So this memo is also a hormone. And so this goes down to the adrenal glands and says, make adrenaline and cortisol. The adrenals go, aye, aye, Captain. So they start to produce the adrenaline and cortisol. And as soon as it gets into the bloodstream, a little memo goes back to say, all right, chaps, I've done my job, stop sending the memo. Yeah? This is what we call a negative feedback loop. There's a feedback going back to where it came from. Except that was probably sent 10, 15 minutes ago. And now we've got a whole new stress. Now we've got some road rage going on. Someone's cut us up. So now that signal's being sent again. So then they go, okay, I'm going to write this memo. And what happens after a period of time is this message just stops being sent. So now we've got this one-way message, which is make adrenaline cortisol, make adrenaline cortisol, make adrenaline cortisol. And that is when the endocrine system starts to be taken down. So the cortisol roller coaster will literally look like, you know, we're asleep, we have an alarm clock screaming child, or our blood sugars drop, bam, we're waking up in the morning. And so I've got cortisol spiking. Now we're kind of like, okay, cortisol's coming down, but okay, quick, okay, crisis with child, can't, you know, lost its soul, can't get to school, okay, busy, okay, now we're going to rush out, and now I've got eating some carbohydrates. The whole day we are living on adrenaline and cortisol. So this message is just constantly coming. And exactly the same way as with insulin, what happens is our cells just get to the point where they go, I'm just now so full of cortisol, I don't even know what to do. It's not even doing the job anymore. And everything gets overwhelmed, and the liver goes, I don't know what to do with it, I can't get rid of it, and so it starts dumping it in the bowel. We stop being able to do the nice peristaltic motion, we either get loose bowels, we get constipated, literally everything falls over. Everything we see in the clinic, everything we see in the clinic comes down to this. Everything. There's a really good book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, don't get mouth ulcers, and it's because they don't do this. Animals don't do this. What animals do is they get into a bit of a fracas with each other. You see it with dogs, don't you? And either they're play fighting, and that's all fun and lovely, or it's actually something a little bit territorial and threat-like. And what they'll do is they'll have a bit of a, and then once they move out of danger, you'll see them do this. And what they're doing is they're literally shaking the adrenaline and cortisol out of their system and resetting their nervous system. Whereas we don't do that. We go, stiff upper lip, crack on, have another cup of tea, have a biscuit, that'll make us feel better. We don't do it. So this cortisol just gets built up in our system over time. Yeah? So the job becomes, how do I switch this off? And the difficulty is that the medical model do not recognise the HPA axis dysregulation, even though functionally we can test for it. We can test through it through saliva, we can test with it through urine, but they're not allowed to recognise that kind of testing. So we've got swathes of people walking around without diagnoses. So I was in this for 12 years before my body fell over enough, and that was with doing kinesiology and supplementing and eating right. It was just because I'd been through such a trauma. I was going through this for 12 years before my body fell over enough to get a diagnosis. Whereas, had we known about this 12 years ago, wouldn't have got to the stage it got to. So this is what we're getting in our clinic. It's just people coming in and going, even with IBS, it's like, yeah, this is the thing, this is the thing. Yeah? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So HPA axis dysregulation is so important and is relatively easy to fix. So blood sugars is always the first step, because that way we're not putting cortisol into our body all those times. So that's 5 times a day that we could stop having cortisol put into our body if we're eating right. Easy. That's a simple fix. Then we have to look at some lifestyle changes. Does this all make sense? Mm-hmm. Any questions thus far? It's cool, isn't it? I love it so much, because everything that I've been struggling with for years just suddenly made sense, and it was like, what a relief. What a relief. The interesting thing as well with cortisol, and I remember going, when someone told me this, like, I don't believe you. But the interesting thing is, when we're in this, it's like we call it being an adrenaline junkie. So classic is when someone really busy executive retires and then a week later drops down dead from a heart attack. Cortisol withdrawal can be, the body gets used to living like this. So we can't just suddenly switch it off. We've got to, diet, lifestyle changes, supplementing, ways to get it down really naturally and carefully. Yeah, it's fascinating.
You always get sick when you go on holiday.
It's why you always get sick when you go on holiday. You go, I've got the bug on the plane. No, we get in touch with millions of viruses and bacteria every single day. It's why did your immune system let that in? It's never I caught a bug. It was already there. It's why was your environment right? That's the key. So, how do we start to change it? Well, firstly, one of the things that we look at is, one of the big things is a supplement. In clinic we use something called adaptogenic herbs. Let's write that down. I'm never quite sure. It's one of those words, I think because it's pretty much a made up word, not by me. It doesn't have a definitive spelling. I use an O, but you can also use an A. Adaptogenic. Depends on where you see it. But an adaptogenic herb, and these have started to become really well known in the past few years. So there are plants on the planet whose primary job is actually to get rid of cortisol. How handy. So that's things like ginseng, licorice root, ashwagandha, rhodiola, kelp's another good one, spirulina, Schisandra's my favourite. Shisandra, I love Shisandra. She sounds fabulous.
That's why I like it as well.
Shisandra. And the adaptogenic herbs, there are actually loads of them, but the adaptogenic herbs also have different jobs. So what I love about kinesiology, when we do the muscle testing and we test to find nutrition, which I'm going to demonstrate in a minute, we can actually start to, I like to get a little profile of what's going on in someone's body. So this is in no way a diagnosis, but when supplements start testing, you start to get this picture of what's going on. So licorice root, for example, if licorice root tests, then it's like, well, the adaptogenic herb is telling us that what's going on underneath this is blood sugar instability. If there's olive leaf, then often it's because there's a low level infection that the body is fighting. It's really fascinating when you start to see what they're doing. But what all adaptogenic herbs, their job is to switch off this memo. They switch this off so that then the body can start to process the huge amount of cortisol that's in the bloodstream. Yeah? That's pure and simply what they do. And what we tend to see is one of two things. People either come into the clinic on the ceiling, literally wired, tired, jittery, anxious, or they come in utterly exhausted on the floor, broken, fatigued, can't cope. It's one of two. So either we've got to the point where we've got high cortisol, or I am now so low in cortisol, my adrenals are tired, I can't make any more. Yeah?
Can you be both?
You can, because you can switch between the two, but it tends to be that we will be high cortisol, we will be overworking adrenals. Oh, who asked the question? Sorry, I don't know. We will have overly high, overstressed adrenals, which then get exhausted. Same as the pancreas. It's worked so hard. Now I've just given up. I haven't got anything else to give. And that's when we get into what is called adrenal fatigue and adrenal exhaustion. Yeah, that takes a little bit more to backtrack, but it's still very possible. Any other questions about that? Okay.
No, it's all right.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask one?
Yes, of course.
Thanks. How is it we're working to turn off the message that gets sent down to the adrenals? Is there no way that we could actually, on the flip side, do something to reactivate the message that goes back up?
It does. The
Okay.
adaptogenic herb does do that, because then this is a very rough diagrammatic way of trying to explain what happens, but absolutely that is what happens. It's just what is happening here is a little bit like when we were talking about the insulin floods the bloodstream so much that it just stops being recognised. It's the same. It's so over flooded it stops being recognised. And so once we actually stop the over flooding, then the body can start to recognise it better.
Okay.
And once we start to reduce it, then those things come back into balance. So let's talk about lifestyle changes, because these become really quite interesting, because so the kind of conditions that we are looking at with real deep stress, yeah, we've got the symptoms that we were talking about, but real deep stress conditions are things like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, ME. They are actually your autoimmune conditions, cancers. They are, what else? Digestive issues. So even the inflammatory bowel diseases, yes, they're showing in the bowel, but that's an autoimmune disease. It's coming from somewhere. And actually all the big conditions, when you start to look at it, they're either an autoimmune disease or they're a cancer. So even cardiovascular disease is nothing to do with the cardiovascular system unless it's a very specific structural, physical thing where a pacemaker's not working, for example. But even still, magnesium can really balance that. Or if someone's got a congenital heart disease, well, okay, well that's why you've got heart disease. However, the heart diseases that we progress into when we start to think about, well, it's to do with cholesterol. Cholesterol is just a response to inflammation in the body. Inflammation's coming because we've got too much cortisol. Yeah? So everything is coming down to too much stress, too much cortisol.
What about Parkinson's?
Parkinson's is a really interesting one. I mean, ultimately it is an autoimmune disease, isn't it? But it's showing it neurologically. It does take me down a slightly different route, and because we're seeing such a vast increase in it. And there's a lot of research now, and I don't know where I stand on this particularly, but there's an awful lot of research with Parkinson's which shows that it's to do with elevated aluminum, like I was American, aluminium in the system. But from my perspective, why are we absorbing so much aluminium? Because again, our body should be able to buffer that. So unless we're in a job where we're in direct connection to that kind of metal toxicity, why are we getting to the point we're bogged down in it? And actually with things like Parkinson's, I'm particularly interested in hydration. I'm particularly interested in the cortisol and the stress that got us there in the first place, but I'm especially interested in wheat, because when we eat wheat, it stops us, it's an anti-nutrient, and it stops us absorbing particularly magnesium, and magnesium we know is a big cellular detoxer, and it enables us to absorb other things. So what happens, one of the things we're going to talk about in lifestyle changes, so this is great because this is feeding into my next section, but one of the big issues with stress is food intolerance. When we eat something we're intolerant to, and I'm not talking about a full-on allergy. Full-on allergy is I come in any kind of contact with that food stuff or that item, and I'm instantly having a huge immune response. So that would be, I instantly get hives, I can't breathe. A food intolerance or a biochemical intolerance, let's call it, is my body can't process that, and 20 minutes later I'm now having a response. So I've got a bit of an itchy eye, I'm just noticed my throat's a bit scratchy, I've got some digestive issues, yeah, or I'm a bit snotty. Hands on frozen yogurt. So we have a response a bit later. But when we have any kind of response to anything we're intolerant to, we have to produce adrenaline and cortisol. So again, we're starting to see this response. Now, interestingly, when we are exposed to something we're intolerant to, specifically food in this case, it happens when we eat it. So let's say it's a really nice sausage roll. So particularly people really struggle with pastry, don't they, with wheat. So I eat that nice sausage roll. What happens when it actually gets into the small intestine? So as soon as we eat it, the body goes, oh, not that again, I don't really know what to do. Can't cope with it, going to produce a load of adrenaline and cortisol. And then the inflammation starts to happen in response to what we've eaten. And as it comes into the small intestine, everything gets a little bit inflamed. So what actually happens when something gets inflamed is it gets bigger. You know, if you cut your finger and it gets inflamed, it gets bigger. The way that the small intestine works is you've got this nice, smooth intestinal wall with these microscopic little holes in it. And once the food's been broken down by the stomach and it goes into the small intestine, this chyme, this broken down food, goes through those microscopic holes into the bloodstream. That's how the bloodstream distributes it's called tight junctions, and it distributes our minerals throughout the bloodstream. However, if those microscopic junctions are now inflamed, we have bigger holes which allow bigger particles of food to get into our bloodstream. Now, so going back to Parkinson's, I will link it back up. When we have something like wheat that is an anti-nutrient and the body goes, I genuinely don't know what to do with this, it goes, I've got big particles of this in my bloodstream, send the immune system to deal with it. That's where our immune system starts to crash. Or store it, and store it. And it stores it wherever it can. So that might be joints, that's rheumatoid arthritis. It might be in bones, that can be things like ankylosing spondylitis. It could be in the brain, that's where we're looking at things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Wherever the body can store this food that it can't break down, is often where we start to see the autoimmune conditions. I know, right? So that's why food intolerances are really, really important.
What about things like hernias?
In which way? As in sort of like a hiatal hernia?
Yeah.
Yes, the hiatal hernia is really common. The way that we teach them, we talk about they're caused by either postural imbalances, food intolerances, and always lack of digestive aid. Stress. It's stress. Really fixable. We've got a lovely technique for that for our digestion module. So does that make sense with the lifestyle and the autoimmune stuff? Yeah. So again, I just go back to a pill is not going to fix this. We've got to start looking at this in the round and seeing what else we can do to our bodies. So lifestyle changes that are important here. Well, exercise, really, really important. Having had chronic fatigue, I got a little bit sick of doctors telling me just go and exercise this out because it doesn't work like that. Because we have got to find the right exercise for us and we have to find it at the right time of day. You have a great story about this, don't you?
So I decided I was going to join CrossFit and get really fit. And I wanted to go with my sister, and she worked all day, so we went in the evening. And my sister started to get fitter and healthier and slimmer, and I got iller and fatter. My bum was getting bigger and bigger, and I was like, I'm doing all this exercise. Why am I
muffin tops in your life
until this isn't fair. And it's because cortisol is highest in the morning and it's meant to come down. And what I was doing was as my cortisol was coming down, I was then going to CrossFit, spiking my cortisol. My body was going, what do I do with this? And storing it as fat. And it also was crashing my immune system. I gave up CrossFit and I lost the weight.
Yeah, it was like within weeks. It was unreal. So so the right exercise at the right time of day is really, really important. Really, really important.
Why would that have been an issue for Laura compared to, say, me? So why can I, for example, do that in the evening and be fine, or your sister?
Really great question. So actually, probably not now because you have a small child, but before that particular period of your life, you would have probably been okay with CrossFit. Well, there's a couple of things. So firstly, Laura's never done intense exercise.
That's just not my thing. I like to sit.
Like, I like to sit. Oh, I've done a nice stretch. I know, she has those arms. It's not fair. We've laughed about this for years. As I'm going to the gym and trying to heavy weights. So firstly, you've never done intense exercise, so never even done particularly running, like never done anything. So that shock on her body, because CrossFit is quite shocking. It wasn't even a slow, gentle, I'm going to start going to the gym, and now I'm quite interested in CrossFit. It was like, bam. Secondly, that particular period of your life was unbelievably stressful. We were actually running a wellness centre, we were working about 90 hours a week. Already cortisol was like up here, to then add more into it, body just went, no thanks, absolutely no thanks. But really good question. So it's what's going on in my life, and what exercise do I apply now? So for example, when I was at my most ill with chronic fatigue, and I was piling on weight, I was like, I must go to the gym, but I was so broken that I would get to the gym and I just even been given a step to just try and step up on it. I remember just standing there one day and bursting into tears and going, I can't do this. So actually even being in the gym or pushing myself to go to the gym when I was that unwell was the worst thing.
That makes sense in CrossFit because it's quite competitive, isn't it? And if you're
Lots of
already in like a situation, then that competition element would not sit well with you, I imagine.
Exactly.
We talk about it like a health bank account. It all depends what your parents had, what you inherited. If you inherited a lot of health, then you can kind of push yourself through, do Ironman, that kind of thing. But if you inherited quite a low bank account, or you had a childhood that had a lot of processed food or a lot of stress, then being an adult, it's going to be harder to do those kind of strenuous exercises, pushing your body to the limit.
Yeah.
So it all depends. We talk about biochemical individuality.
Yeah, and also what's going on in your life. So there are times, if I notice I'm more stressed, that I might go to the gym and I say, I'm not doing shuttle runs today. I'll pull some extra weights, but I'm not doing shuttle runs. It's what is going on in my life and how do I apply the consciousness to what is right. Oh, actually, I'm going to go for a longer swim. Yeah? Yeah. So what exercise and what time of day? That is a really, really big one. Cosmetics and toiletries. Again, this is a soapbox that I could get on for quite a long time, but I'm going to keep it short. So in cosmetics and toiletries, there are and cleaning products, there are very, very toxic chemicals. Those toxic chemicals massively interfere with our endocrine system, massively. In fact, there are some chemicals in those products, so specifically parabens, which have got a really bad rap in the last few years, thankfully. They're actually in a genre of chemicals called endocrine disruptors. They're called EDCs, endocrine disruptor chemicals, and yet they're in our toiletries. It's shocking, absolutely shocking. There is a great book about this. It's a very short read and fantastic. It's a book by a woman called Stacey Malkan, M-A-L-K-A-N, called Not Just a Pretty Face. And she started the database for safe cosmetics. And there is shocking evidence, particularly around things like the Johnson & Johnson's baby products. But one of those on their own, fine. But when you're using all of them, the toxic buildup is actually enough to cause massive sort of fertility issues in girls, even boys who are in utero exposed to a mother like piling on different chemicals and toiletries and perfumes and goodness knows what else. Because the average woman with hair care products and toiletries and cosmetics and everything we can expose our body to over 500 toxic chemicals a day. So in utero being exposed to that, then we actually have boys being genital malformation because of the endocrine disruption. I mean, it's shocking, right, for toiletries. So cosmetics, toiletries and cleaning products, we go toxic free. So I've had clients come into the clinic with things like multiple sclerosis, and it's like, right, straight away we're cleaning up your cosmetics and toiletries. And these days it's really easy to do. I mean, organic or clean products are the watchword, so they're everywhere, so it's much cheaper than it was 15 years ago. And what I would say is start off with the things that are in contact with your skin the most often. So go for a clean foundation if that's all you can afford. Avoid the toxic perfumes. Just got off for Christmas, which is I actually bought myself, and it's completely organic. I was like so excited because I've not worn perfume for years and years and years. So they are out there, and it just takes a little bit of research. Dietary tweaks to remove intolerances. So here's the thing. On one of our health forms in the clinic, it says, is there any food that you suspect you're food or items you suspect you're intolerant to? People write down wheat or dairy, and then are shocked when we actually do a food intolerance test and tell them that they're intolerant to wheat or dairy. It's like, we know what our bodies, when we feel good after food or when we don't. But the biggie is wheat. It's wheat and milk. Milk, because we actually don't often, not all of us have the enzymes to break down milk. And it's not all milks, it's cow's milk, it's the type of casein in cow's milk. But also because of the mass farming, milk itself is highly inflammatory. So anything to do with mucus, digestive complaints, too much estrogen, which we'll be talking about the next workshop, that always sort of smacks of dairy for me, dairy and milk intolerances. Digestive issues, joint problems, aches and pains, immune issues, adrenal issues, skin issues, wheat, always wheat. And it's because we hybrid the grain in 1969. It was a tall grain, we made it short for better crop yields. The gluten content, went up exponentially. It's not fit for human consumption, and then we started spraying it with pesticide that obliterates our gut microbiome. We have completely ruined that as a grain. But there are loads of alternatives, so it's not all doom good. Slowing down, and I remember being told I was doing too much, but it's that thing I was saying about how when we have elevated cortisol, we will keep making decisions and lifestyle choices to keep the cortisol high, because we're in this cycle and the body doesn't want it to stop, because just stopping is also dangerous. So slowing down and really learning how to strip things out is absolutely vital. One of the big things that I talk to people about is not having periods of the day where there's no telly on, when you don't have music, actually being in some quiet to give your nervous system a break. Really important. So getting enough sleep, so one of the things that we talk about is sleeping in a sleep-worthy room, which is absolute black. LED lights, so the little blue or little red LED lights really upset the pineal gland, like dramatically, and it stop it doing its job. So I travel everywhere with bits of electrical tape and always stuck over the tellies in hotel rooms, because your pineal gland becomes very, very sensitive. So kind of eliminating any light from your room, really important. And sounds. People say, oh, I'm going to sleep with music. And I'm like, yeah, that's actually really stressful for your nervous system. Yeah, getting really used to quiet.
In fact, sound. Would having a fan on be the same sort of thing? Because I have to have it on now for the sake of having it on because of the noise.
Because the noise.
The binaurals.
Yeah. So binaural beats are an interesting one because they can be really soothing for the nervous system. And you can get, so binaural beats, if you don't know, if you go onto YouTube and just put in binaural beats, digestion, binaural beats, anxiety, it's actually mimics brainwaves, the sound of brainwaves, and to counteract the brainwaves of things like anxiety or digestive complaints. They're really, really clever, and some of them don't have music, it's just
I got
noise.
to just, so I get a really, really deep sleep.
Yeah, they're
Like,
great.
In a second.
And actually a fan, that kind of white noise, can be quite hypnotic. Another thing is earplugs, sleeping with earplugs in, because that again can really help the nervous system to set. Working on our emotional issues, because those emotional issues take up brain space. So doing self-development work really reduces our stress profile. And deep trauma, when we talk about emotional trauma is also physical trauma because we will be in a trauma response, which means that we are so deeply in this that our adrenals are really stressed. Really stressed. So, it's a really good idea to make note of a couple of things in your life that you know that you can tweak. So let's just spend 2 minutes. You'll know from what I've said what feels like your areas of focus.
Going back to what you were saying about the dairy and the wheat and does that depend on like ethnicity where you were born?
Wheat, no, because we broke the grain. So no.
Even if you were born in a completely different country?
No, we broke the grain. The
Oh,
grain.
right, okay.
So your ability to tolerate grains
Yeah,
will be
different.
So you might be better with things like spelt, rye, barley.
Yeah,
But no, we broke wheat. That's a non-negotiable. Even organic wheat, it's still broken.
yeah.
Our body, there's an interesting thing that you can do a load of research on, is gluten cross-sensitivity. So the more our body is in stress by wheat, it will also look at other grains and go, oh, you're too similar. So for some people, actually we do have to avoid all gluten, but not for everyone. And that, I do believe, would have some genetic predisposition to where you're from. Milk, again, that would just be a genetic thing of whether or not you can break down the casein and the lactase. That's the lactose, sorry, if you've got lactase, that would be genetic, but again, the way that, so that would be, could you tolerate raw milk, for example, or goat's milk, because not everyone can. That would be genetics.
Okay.
Okay, so, structure, posture with stress. Glamorous assistant I used to say that, didn't I?
Yeah.
So it's my glamorous assistant Debbie McGee, and then people start calling me Debbie. You won't do that anymore.
Okay, so the muscles to do with the adrenals are in the legs, and this makes sense because when we are under stress, we do feel our legs, we hear shocking news, our legs do give way. We have the sartorius. The sartorius is a twisty muscle in the thigh. It starts in the hip and it comes down into the knee. And if this muscle isn't working, it does rotate the hip. And so if you can imagine, if that hip is twisting, the foot tends to come out. Or the foot can go in, but it is more common that it goes out. And so this kind of wide boy posture that you do see is a lot of stress, particularly the lads who play the computer games with the jiggery legs. That's nervous system, and they tend to have this walk.
Liam Gallagher must be really stressed.
We've also got the gracilis. The gracilis is in the thigh. So when this isn't working, again, you can either get the leg rotating, or you can get the inner thighs don't have any strength, which supports the hips. Then we've got gastrocnemius and we've got the soleus, and this is the calf muscle. And so we talk about people who have very, very tight Achilles heels. It's adrenals. It's stress, stress, stress. And so anybody who has very, very tight calf muscles, like runners, I'll be looking at adrenals. So it's all leg muscles. You want to do a test? Show the... Do you want to do a test? Or you want to show it on you? How much time have we got?
5 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so sartorius, hold on to the board for me. We bring the leg up and out, and the muscle is in that direction. So it's that muscle there. We've got gracilis, which is you turn the foot in, and we push the leg out, which is testing this muscle here. Turn away from me. The gastrocnemius, can you point your toe for me? Actually, this is soleus, is just this muscle here. And then gastrocnemius is a little bit lower. Point the toe, and it's that one. So anybody who has any calf, ankle pain in this area, I'm thinking stress and adrenals.
So to give you an idea with kinesiology how we then test nutrition, when we find an unlocking muscle, we could probably do a demo of this.
Yeah?
Yeah. So when we have an unlocking muscle, let's sartorius. Yeah. Shall we sartorius? We'll use this one. It's not bad here. Okay. So the unlocking muscle. What we then do is we find nutrition. So as I mentioned earlier, we have adaptogenic herbs, and here we have got a collection of adaptogenic herbs that all do the same job by stopping that HPA axis dysregulation, but also do some individual jobs as well. And all we do in kinesiology is we hold the nutrition up to near the parotid glands. The parotid gland in our throats is where we make saliva, so it's the digesting part. So we basically hold nutritional supplementation up to sort of the jaw, really. And if it's in plastic or glass, the body can see through that. If it's in metal, it can't. So the body is essentially reading what's in this pot. And what will happen is it will either, the muscle, it will switch, it's like we're trying to switch on a light. So the muscle will either lock and the light will go on, or it won't. Yeah? So there's no guesswork with kinesiology. So let's try this one. No, not that one. You can choose and I won't look and see what they are. And hold. Easier. Lovely. See how that one locked? Yeah? Try from there first. And hold. No. You can feel the difference. You can have a play and break. Let's try that one. No, just feel you can't even hold the muscle up. So with kinesiology we found
Ginseng?
Yep, so ginseng, that's it's actually one off and on. So that would be the adaptogenic herb to stop my HPA axis dysregulation. Yeah? Good, huh? No
What could
guesswork.
be really interesting in clinic is if Claire had come with hip pain and I introduced Siberian ginseng into the circuit and then I tested that muscle again, often the pain can go. And that can be wow from the client. I've had this hip pain for weeks and suddenly you've brought something up into my neck and it's gone. But that really shows that ginseng is really going to support that hip and that muscle and those adrenals.
Yeah, amazing. So supplements for the adrenals, the adaptogens, magnesium, because now magnesium for everything and everyone, and that's also just to do with the electrical systems of the body. Sorry, and I've said before, calcium switches a muscle on, so makes it fire. Magnesium switches a muscle off, but we need muscles to switch off. So actually, those twitchy muscles that we get, is the muscle not being able to switch off. Yeah, so a muscle works by, so for example, my bicep, when my bicep switches off, my tricep will switch on. So they counter work. Otherwise we'd all walk around like zombies. So magnesium switches off muscles. It helps us relax, it helps us sleep, does all of those things. B vitamins are really important for stress adrenals. They actually really help with that metabolism for the thyroid. So I really see that, yes, underactive thyroid is important, but they're getting more underactive because of this stressed adrenal issue. Yeah. Omega oils again to remove the excess cortisol, and something called CoQ10 is actually involved in the energy production cycle, and that's really important when people have got fatigue. So there are supplements. Any questions about adrenals? Yes.
So when you tested the supplements for the adaptogenics, if you're using one dose doesn't agree with a system but you don't know it, so I'm on ashwagandha, and if that wasn't the right one, would it have a negative
It won't have a negative effect, it just won't be doing as much. You won't be absorbing it as well. And they change, our supplements change.
Yeah.
So often when people are going, I felt great, and then suddenly I was like, something's changed. The supplements changed. Yeah. There was a couple of questions earlier on about.
Is that me?
Yes.
I've recently had a hysterectomy. My ovaries dying, and since stress, anxiety, heart palpitations have been confirmed with an ECG, I now have a regular heartbeat. HRT is I've been told I need to go on for 15 years, which I'm not too happy about. What else can I do take to prevent that?
So the hormonal bits I'd like to cover with the hormone workshop, but if I talk about stress and the heartbeat, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's fine.
Write this down. I talk about this. I did write it. I know I wrote it.
I found it interesting when you said about physical stress, because I don't feel like I've had a stressful year, but I've had 2 operations and pneumonia all within 18 months, so it has been quite, you were saying that actually physical stress does have an impact.
So there's something really interesting. I'm going to bring it into now because of that question, although it's also covered in the hormone aspect of the workshop. But it's because stress is so important in that instance. Our adrenal glands, actually let me break it down differently. Oh, I had a pen. Okay. You see the board? Okay. Let me just make sure I'm getting this right. Okay. So a couple of things I'm going to come on to. So actually this is great, thank you for bringing this up. So in our adrenal glands, we need cholesterol because in our adrenal glands we're going to be making a couple of different hormones. So we know about cortisol and adrenaline, but the adrenal glands also make other hormones, which is actually really, really interesting. DHEA goes to estrogen, testosterone. Okay, so this is why low-fat diets are also horrific, and particularly for women, as you'll see, but horrific. So cholesterol is good. So I mean, good cholesterol. Good cholesterol comes from fat, and from cholesterol we make very, very important hormones. So first of all, we make a hormone called aldosterone. And aldosterone is to do with salt balance in the body. So the salt balance does one of two things. It will either, we basically can create blood pressure issues and palpitations.
Very low blood pressure, like ridiculously
Right,
low.
and so low blood pressure is categorically an adrenal imbalance. Categorically. In fact, one of the tests for adrenal fatigue is when you're sitting down, is your blood pressure different than when you stand up? So if you stand up and your blood pressure gets lower, that is
I
classic.
normally need to feel like I'm going to pass out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's classic adrenal. That'd be one of the sort of symptoms that would be like, okay, that's adrenal fatigue, for sure. And so aldosterone is to do with this salt balance. And so two things happen with the salt balance: either blood pressure and heart rate, or water retention. Yeah, because the salt and the water, or both. So this is blood pressure, heart rate. Heart rate is also magnesium, which is also an underlying sign of adrenal stress because we need more and more and more of it when we're adrenally stressed. So aldosterone is linked to the blood pressure and heart rate and also water retention. So when people are, so it's really interesting because this is what I love about this, because when I first started out as a jobbing kinesiologist, I remember someone came in with really, really bad water retention and I was working on the kidneys and I was like, no, it's all adrenal, and I didn't know why. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's so great to go, oh, this is water retention. A water retention tablet is not going to fix this, it's aldosterone. The adrenals are too stressed to make enough aldosterone. So I'd be looking at, we need to work on the adrenals because of the aldosterone issue with what's going on hormonally there for you. The cholesterol also makes DHEA, which is actually considered our youth hormone. It's actually lots of energy in DHEA, and DHEA is a precursor to estrogen and testosterone. Fell off the page there. For estrogen and testosterone. So this is really interesting, right? That when men get stressed, and women, but we stop making the testosterone, hair starts thinning, libido drops off.
hair comes out in clumps. Yeah.
Hair comes out in clumps, and this will be because there isn't enough DHEA. Then the biggie we're going to be talking about in a bit is pregnenolone. So cholesterol makes a hormone precursor called pregnenolone. And pregnenolone is responsible for making progesterone. So here we've got the three big hormones: progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. Men have pregnenolone too. They just don't turn it into progesterone. But this is energy. It's like really lovely. But progesterone is the biggie for women. When there's any level of stress applied, so progesterone, we'll talk about it, but it means progestation hormone. That's what progesterone is. So it's to hold a baby. So again, if any stress is applied here, how important is it to hold a baby when there's a saber-toothed tiger behind us? Absolutely not important at all. Yeah, I've got to make this body survive first. So the body turns progesterone. Guess what it turns it into? Cortisol. So applying HRT to this, when we've got, it's actually an adrenal issue. If I now try and mask, the symptoms might not come from not enough estrogen. Yes, I hear that there's an issue with your ovaries, but those ovaries shouldn't be struggling. Yeah? yes, you've had a hysterectomy, but your ovaries should be able to cope.
I died. I've been told by my doctor they are game over.
Yeah, so
They've
you've gone
gone.
into primary ovarian
Yeah.
insufficiency.
Yeah.
But primary ovarian insufficiency is an adrenal fatigue issue. So what we have to do
Interestingly, I'm
first...
dieting to death because my greatest fear is putting on weight,
Of course.
and fat is
Of course,
out of my diet.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know.
And I'm eating fruit by the bucket load,
Yeah.
trying to be healthy. That's
Exactly.
going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's so great, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we go, oh yes, I know what's going on.
Yeah.
So actually, HRT at this stage, if you're not symptomatic, probably not the answer, because you're going to be putting a sticking plaster over this, where actually we need to get that, we need to get that, and we need to get that in balance. And HRT, the high levels of estrogen that are going in, it's almost like it's the wrong end of the hormone chain. We need to get these bits sorted out. So that can be done, absolutely. If you're not symptomatic yet, that can definitely be done with diet, with lifestyle, with the emotional stuff, because I imagine your body's been through a bit
It's
to...
been for a lot.
Exactly. So there will be some work there that can be worked on. Adaptogenic herbs, the right supplements. All of those bits can be done first, and then if that doesn't work, then you can look at things like other hormones. And the doctors do have versions of HRT that are useful. They just don't want to give them to you because they're more expensive. So when we have that knowledge and we go and make those requests of our doctors when our body is ready for them, that's a game changer.
Sorry, can I ask on top of that? So I don't have any ovaries, and I'm on HRT. So where would the balance would still come with those three?
Yes,
Still?
because now it's your adrenals that are needing to make everything.
Yep.
And your adrenals needing to make everything means that we have got to absolutely wrap your adrenals up in cotton wool.
Yeah.
Because the HRT, again, it's that thing of it's too much at this end.
Yeah.
If we haven't, it's like we're trying to pile a massive house onto a weak foundation. And if the adrenals are stressed, also the things that are in HRT, we do cover it more in the next session, they're so active and there's such a huge amount of them that if you have been forced into an early menopause, your body doesn't need that amount of them. It's a whole, we're talking about a whole different situation here. So that's where we end up with things like the breast cancer, you know, potentials, because it's just overloading our body with too many active hormones that it doesn't need. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
What about if somebody's been diagnosed with thyroid problems or has had thyroid removed? I get that some of the thyroid problems actually are hormonal, that's what I'm discovering. But if you've had thyroid removed from whatever reason, or I know some people who have had kind of that Hashimoto's diagnosed, and I'm just like, give me hormones.
Yeah. So Hashimoto's is an autoimmune, so I'm always looking at adrenals.
Okay.
Overactive thyroid, so Graves' disease, it's similar with the adrenals. It's overactive because it's so stressed, and we actually need to support it. So we actually often in clinic treat it like an underactive thyroid. So it actually needs a lot of the same stuff as an underactive thyroid. If you've had the thyroid removed, then yes, you are always going to need thyroxine because we can't. There isn't a natural alternative. And at that stage, I wouldn't be messing around with any of the. There's something called armour thyroid, which is I think basically, is it natural or it's from pigs or something? But I would be going at that stage. If you've got a thyroid issue, then armour can be a solution instead of thyroxine. But once you've got to the point where you've got no thyroid, definitely need the thyroxine. But what people find is their thyroxine requirements go up and up and up because guess what? This bit hasn't been dealt with. So in the same way as the insulin, once we deal with this bit, then we can actually be on lower levels of thyroxine because actually that is really toxic for the body too. So we need to keep the balance. So I'd definitely be looking at supplementing diet, the lifestyle, all of the things.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, little quiz. So, 5 questions. What is the endocrine? Yes, glandular system, well done. Name the 3 parts of the endocrine involved in the HPA axis. Well done.
Pituitary.
Well done. Excellent. What are the two main stress hormones? Adrenaline and cortisol. Well done. Name three factors, lifestyle factors. Name three lifestyle factors that can impact stress.
Sleep.
Diet, yeah.
Chemicals. Environment.
Chemicals, environment, yeah. And exercise, exactly. Name one stress muscle.
Pointer.
Soleus, well done. Excellent. Good work. Great. You've now ended up.